Okay, so we have 3 adults, 2 large and noisy dogs. When I was a boy, my friends and I would oftentimes walk around on the country roads where we lived in rural Oregon and pick up bottles and cans. And we do that just as part of our daily activities. When we were playing, we'd take the bottles and cans down to the country store and turn them in for a nickel or a dime, depending on whether it was cans or bottles, usually buy a can. If you had a haul like this, which I picked up yesterday in about 25 minutes in Walla Walla, you could easily have bought a couple of Snickers bars and 4 Jolly Ranchers, for example, or a can of pop and 4 Jolly Ranchers. So to us, that was great. People littering meant money for us. It was money in the bank. But it was also litter on the highway. Good afternoon, I'm Alistair Stewart, and today I'm going to talk to you about why we should have a bottle bill in Washington. There's 3 major benefits to having a bottle bill. The first one is litter reduction. In states that have bottle bills, there's a substantially smaller amount of beverage containers like these, but there's also less litter overall. Another benefit is job creation. It might not seem like it when you charge somebody extra money to pick up a bottle or a can, but jobs are created in states that have bottle bills, either in redemption centers or with added jobs down at the grocery store. And the final benefit that's created by having a bottle bill is conserving your natural resources. You've got plastic, aluminum, and glass. All of those have to be manufactured in the case of plastic, they're made out of oil, which means depending on foreign sources largely to get your natural resources. And if you can keep those in the production stream instead of in the landfill, then you've got a benefit right there. Now there are several arguments that are made against bottle bills. The number one thing that people argue against them is that they just cost more than they're worth. That having a bottle bill is more expensive than having curbside recycling, for example, or other comprehensive recycling services. Another argument that's made against having a bottle bill is convenience, or actually the lack of convenience, because for a consumer, you go to the store, you pay an extra fee, and then you have to schlep the bottles and cans back to the store afterwards, and oftentimes you have to go to the same store. And the final factor that people cite when they're arguing against this is that bottles and cans really don't make that much of the waste stream, and so the benefit of the program is limited because they're not that much of the trash. So we'll discuss all of those, but let's start first with the benefits. So the first benefit is litter reduction. It's easy to say anecdotally that when you have a bunch of kids and people like that picking up bottles and cans at the roadside that you would have less litter, but specifically in Oregon, for example, when the bottle bill was enacted, and that's been several decades ago, the state did a study. The Department of Environmental Quality found that 5 out of every 6 cans or bottles were being picked up. So that's 83% of the bottles and cans that were being littered or otherwise not returned, maybe put in a landfill or just left out in somebody's backyard. And in addition to the 83%, there was an overall drop in litter of 47%. So that's about half of the litter at the roadside that disappeared just by making a bottle bill. Now there's other states that have bottle bills too. There's about a dozen in the country. In Iowa, the numbers are a little bit less than in Oregon, but when they adopted a bottle bill, they saw a 76% reduction in beverage containers, and they saw about a 39% reduction in overall litter. And in Maine, the numbers aren't quite as concrete, but the U.S. General Accounting Office reports that when Maine instituted their bill, they saw a reduction in beverage containers of about 69%, and that their overall litter dropped by 34%, which is a third. So as you can see, those are substantial reductions that all of the states that have bottle bills enjoy over states that don't. Now, beyond the aesthetics of less litter, there's jobs at stake. And it might seem counterintuitive to say that when you add a deposit to beverage containers that you would create jobs. But in fact, if you go by data provided by the Bottle Bill Resource Guide, which is a pro-bottle bill advocacy group, what they found is that in states that have bottle bills, there's a creation of jobs to the tune of tens of thousands. In Oregon, which is one of the states that has less jobs created overall, they found that 350 to 400 jobs were created with the creation of the bottle bill. Now, in other states like Michigan and New York, the numbers were in the thousands. So there were more than 4,000 jobs created in each of those states. And those are all well-paying jobs in redemption centers and also in grocery stores. One other side benefit in terms of job creation is that in states that have bottle bills, the resource guide finds that there's an overall increase in recycling, so that it's not just people bringing back the beverage containers, but also turning in more cardboard, turning in more paper and other recyclables. And so that carries over to private businesses that handle recyclables, as well as to municipalities that have to hire an extra trash man to go around and pick up, like they do in Walla Walla, to pick up the recycling. So the numbers tell the story with jobs. If you have a bottle bill, you create jobs. It varies depending on what kind of bottle bill you have. So you might have a few hundred jobs, or you might have a few thousand jobs, depending on whether you go with a model that's more like Oregon or a model that's more like Michigan or New York, or California for that matter. Jobs are just one of the several pieces of good work that can be done by a bottle bill. The most obvious one maybe is resource conservation. All of these things come out of the ground originally. Glass has to be refined, aluminum has to be smelted, plastic has to be created out of oil. And these are just a few of the billions of containers that are returned each year in container deposit states. Connecticut alone, according to the state's public interest research group, sees about 1.1 billion containers returned for their deposit each year. And that's all material that would have either been recycled in a regular fashion, like at curbside, or possibly ended up in the landfill. But that's a way to ensure that a much larger proportion of the bottles and cans get back into the production stream. And that's really what it boils down to, is keeping them in use and not in the landfill. None of these things biodegrade well. Plastic bottles are said to degrade over the course of time, but that can take thousands of years. And if they're littered into a waterway and carried out to sea, they will essentially never disappear. They get ground into small bits in the ocean's currents. Glass obviously it's a rock, so it's not going to biodegrade ever. And the same thing is true of aluminum, which is a metal. It will corrode eventually, but it will never truly disappear. One other aspect of resource conservation that is enjoyed by people who have bottle bills is that the consumers who bought these packages will take them back to the place where they picked them up, probably on a return trip to the store. Most people don't go to the store only once in their whole life. And that means that those materials, all that weight, isn't carried by municipal haulers, private haulers, but instead is carried back by the consumers, which means less use of gasoline, less use of other resources to keep these things in production. So we've covered the major benefits of having a bottle bill. You've got your litter cut substantially, more than in half in many cases, depending on which numbers you look at. You add jobs, you save resources. But there are several reasons that are given in opposition to bottle bills, so we'll talk about those now. The opponents are primarily industry groups such as the American Beverage Association and other groups that see these as less worth our time than other possible options. The main things that they cite are it's more expensive to have a bottle bill or a container deposit program than it is to have curbside hauling. Another thing that they cite is the inconvenience that we touched on earlier. You have to clean these up, haul them down to the recycling place, and that can add time and inconvenience to anybody's day. And a third aspect